At any one moment, millions of containers are being shipped across the seas. This network of trade is enabled by software. Everything is tracked, everything is accounted for, everything is flowing like a well-oiled machine. This is the world of logistic technology, or LogTech. Like all software, it has undergone massive transformation over the last 40 years. We have had the ERP boom, the move to the cloud, and the VC funding excesses. Today, the AI wave is shaking everything up again. After VCs have splashed multi-billion dollars in this industry, why has fragmentation persisted? Why haven't those investments paid off? Is AI the silver bullet that's going to make the VC whole? To help answer those questions, I spoke with Eric Johnson, senior tech editor at the Journal of Commerce. He has covered the LogTech industry for the past 20 years. From his accidental entry in the shipping journalism to turning down a VC job because of imposter syndrome, Eric shares it all. He will also reveal why you can't spell tariff without using AI. There's a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity sitting in plain sight. If you're in logistics, tech, or just curious about the future of shipping, this free-flowing conversation is made for you. So we'd like to start from the beginning. How did you ended up in the GOC to cover the shipping industry?
So I always say that people who end up in shipping, one of two ways. You either accidentally walked into the wrong door in an office or fate directed you to be in this industry, or you were brought into it through family, right? There's no two other ways. Like no one voluntarily signs up for this when they're a kid, right? You want to be an astronaut or a firefighter or something. So my story is very much the first one. I was a career journalist, so I went to school for journalism. After my undergrad degree, I was in the US. I was back in Southern California where I was born and raised, and I was a journalist there, but not doing anything in the shipping industry, not even doing anything business related. It was covering like mall openings and, high school sports. And, just when you're starting off as a journalist, you take whatever work you can get and you take whatever the editor sends your way. So about 4 years into that, I was working for a newspaper that's pretty well known in the Southern California area.
What's it called?
I was the Orange County Register. So it's sort of the second biggest newspaper in Southern California after the LA Times at that time, and probably still is. I was working for a small like weekly newspaper in one of the cities that this newspaper distributes in. But one of the things that the newspaper did is they gave you a chance to rotate onto different desks at the newspaper. So I got a week-long chance to be on the business desk, on the daily business desk. Had no interest in business until then. Really never, ever envisioned. I didn't take a single business class in school. No economic stats, no nothing, right? I was liberal arts all the way. And I loved it. Like from the very first time I sort of like started on that desk, I loved it. It was like very interesting. It was very apparent to me right away that business, I didn't have an appreciation for how business sort of supports everything else that we do and love, right? I was very much like, there's this door behind which the engine of the world works, and I'm outside the door just enjoying what that engine does, basically. So I then got an opportunity to work on a weekly business newspaper in that area. It was small, but I got to really meet like business owners every week, kind of try to like understand what it meant to be a business reporter, which I quickly understood. I had no idea, right? So I had no background at all. So, and there were some big businesses at that time, including, companies that are relevant to my job now. There was a company called Bax Global, which is a huge logistics and express company at that time that was based in Irvine, California, which is where I was based. I had a chance to talk to them. And I had no idea what they did. I had no context for the industry that they were in. I had no idea how big or small they were relative to like the rest of the world. And so I started to realize these people can tell me anything and I have no way to validate against what they're telling me, right? Because I have no background in this. It would be like someone saying something in Portuguese to me and me being like, that sounds good. I don't know. I have no way. So I decided to go back to business school, graduate degree. I knew I wanted to be in England for a year just because I wanted to live abroad. England was the best way to do that and have
Speak
a
English.
a language I could understand while learning. Got a degree in business, marketing management, very basic degree. And when I came back, here's where the falling backward in the industry story comes. When I came back to Southern California, there was a job at another daily newspaper that was like probably the third or fourth biggest in LA at the time. And the job was covering the ports of LA and Long Beach because it was in Long Beach. The paper was based in Long Beach, and because the
It's
ports
the
were
biggest
such
employer.
it's the biggest economic engine, and obviously in
Yeah.
that city, and even really like one of the biggest in Southern California. They had like a specific beat covering that, just the ports, but not from like the way I cover it now. It was what it means to the common person, right? Like, is the
Right.
port creating a lot of emissions? Is the port creating a lot of traffic? Is it down this year and that means the city gets less money, that kind of thing. So that was my entry in. Honestly, it was like, there's a spot on the business desk, and I studied a tiny little bit around distribution strategy and procurement. So I had sort of like the edges of supply chain, but nothing about transportation logistics. That was my like post grad degree was that job for a year and a half.
That's your way in. So what's the thing that attracted you the most? Well, that's really interesting. I want to do for the next 20 years of my life and devote my time to this.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was lots of fascinating things about it. There were also a lot of boring administrative things, right? Like I had to attend Long Beach Harbor Commission meeting, and I had to go to, I had to sit and wait and watch longshoremen queue in line to see if they could, be part of a lottery to be chosen for the next batch of longshore, because it was a lottery that was so sought after because they're well-paying jobs in the States. So, there was a lot of boring stuff, but the interesting stuff was, like adult little kid, the first time you go on a container terminal, it's like the first time you got your toy truck, and like you're looking at these massive pieces of equipment that you have no sense of the scale of, but then when you do notice them at the distance, they look very different than when you're sitting under a 170-foot ship to shore crane, right? So that, and definitely the international aspect of it appealed to me. I was lucky enough as a kid to travel a fair amount internationally, so I had the travel bug and the interest in different cultures. So, I mean, it's sort of a little bit trite to say, but like, there's a reason, I think, why those are probably the two main reasons why the industry kind of captures people's attention, is because it has this sort of mystique to it, both in terms of like the scale of the engineering feats and also the international aspect of it.
And to learn more about it, do you read books? Do you talk to people? How did you educate yourself and get up to speed?
So I've probably gotten 7 million book recommendations over my career, and I've maybe read 5 of them. I didn't read the box at that time. I didn't read, all the sort of bedrock shipping books. For me, the best way to learn something is just to talk to people. That's the first day of my job in 98 when I graduated from college to today. Like, when I talk to you, I get an understanding of concepts that I have no idea. So for me, it's always been, the learning has always been talking to people. And the other great thing about this industry is most people want to talk about what they do. They're actually excited to talk about what they do. Most of the time, no one asks them what they do.
Exactly. No, because nobody wants to know what they do usually.
So as long as you give them the trust that you're not going to misuse their words, most people will talk to you more than you have time to even hear them talk. That's been my experience. So that goes back all the way back then.
No, I agree. It's same as for me. Because I mean, if I talk about the thing that interests me, like my wife's like, I'm not interested. Stop talking. My kids are too young. I don't care. So anyway, this podcast is also for us to talk about shipping.
The spouse doesn't count, because you could talk about the most interesting thing in the world, but the voice, after a certain number of years, like, they can't hear the sound of the voice anymore. That's
true.
Hey, Zach in the editing room here. I realize that 76.8% of you have not yet subscribed to the Schelling Point. If you could just hit the subscribe button down below, it will really help us out and keep producing content like this. Thank you. Now back to the Schelling Point.
So there's often tried path to become a VC. And the most famous journalist become VC is Mike Moritz, who is a partner of Sequoia. Quite a successful guy, right? He backed a bunch of company. And I would argue that the reason Mike Moritz was so successful is because he, as you just said, right, he's like, talk to people, a good judge of character. So the question is, have you thought becoming a VC?
The short answer to your question, have I thought about being a VC? Yes, because I was offered a role at a VC one time.
Wow. When was that?
This was, let's see, before the pandemic. So it would have been like 18, 19, I want to say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's someone who I'm still good friends with. And yeah, me turning him down didn't spoil the relationship, which it shouldn't. I
Yes.
think he understood. So I have thought about it, and I completely agree with you. And the reason that I find it really interesting to talk to a lot of VCs, and I assume, well, I'll get into this in a sec. It's interesting for me to talk to VCs because I do agree that my role at the JOC specifically seems very similar to the role that they play, which is you have to, in a short period of time, assess whether someone is telling you the truth, a good story, part of the truth, whether they have good intentions or bad intentions, all that judge of character kind of stuff. And the last thing as a reporter you want to do is write a story, and then the thing that you write about crashes spectacularly the next week, right? So, and I certainly have had a few of those situations in my career. So yeah, I think the only difference is I always say that when I think about this, the only thing, the difference I say is that VCs have to invest capital, currency, other people's money generally, which puts a lot of accountability on them. My accountability has nothing to do with money. It has to do with my reputation, right? So the minute that I write a story that seems to be cheerleading for a company, or seems to be unfairly targeting a company, or seems to be ill-informed, the person who sees my name is going to trust me less the next time. So that's the only thing. That's the big difference is I don't have other people's skin in the game. I only have my skin in the game. That's kind of the way I look at it. But the flip side is I think there's a lot of VCs who value my opinion on the market legitimately. And I can tell generally because we have conversations that suggest they're more interested in my opinion than anything else. There are some obviously that just want my attention so that their portfolio companies get
pump there
mentioned in stories or put on panels, right? So, I've been doing this long enough to know where people's, agendas are, and that's fine. Like that's part of the game. I'm not holding it against anyone. Yeah. If someone wants their fund or their portfolio company to get noticed, I can't argue with them for wanting that.
Okay. So you've thought about it, you turn it down.
Yeah.
But
you want to know the reason? I'll tell you the reason why I turned it down. Some of it was self-doubt, even though this person tried to convince me over and over that you're more than equipped to do this. At the time, I really felt like I would be a total phony. Like I said, going back, no economics, no finance background. I know how to take care of my household expenses and invest my retirement fund, but that's about it. And I usually don't meddle too much with that. So the idea of me making dollar decisions and figuring out carry and figuring out unit economics and all the other buzzwords around VC seemed, and he said, I'll handle that. I just need you to be a good horse picker, So that was part of it, which, I would have gotten over probably. Because sometimes I feel like a phony talking about technology and logistics because I've never worked at a software company. I've never worked in a logistics company. I've never been a shipper, but that's beside the point. So where I think I sort of made the decision to stay is I felt like in my heart, I was a journalist and I find what I do really interesting. And I was worried that I would stop finding it interesting if my job every day was to sort through 100 calls and 100 decks and just sort of play the probability odds a little bit. I always worry that if I do something different, I'm going to be less interested in it than I am right now doing what I do. Cause I never get bored doing what I do right now. And then the other thing is I thought, and I think I'm wrong on this, but I thought once I go this route, I felt like it was going to be hard to be the same journalist I was if I hated it and wanted to come back, because I thought people might see me as, oh, he kind of jumped ship and he wanted to go after the money and the high flying job. I wasn't really concerned with that. It was more like the perception of, oh, you're kind of different now. I like being able to tell people that I'm a career journalist and I've never done anything else. That to me gives me a sense of neutrality when I talk to anybody to say, this is all I do and this is all I plan to do.
If I can react to that, I think number one, the imposter syndrome, don't worry about it. I think 80% of VC have no idea what they're talking about. Typically, they read our books, they use very complicated words, and they get all the information from Twitter. It's echo chamber, right? You have one or two guys who's the leading voice, and everybody repeats what they're saying. So it sounds very impressive, but in reality, it's very surface level knowledge. So I think you know already way more than the average VC, I would say.
This is what the guy who was trying to hire me was trying to convince me of too. So
I guarantee it's absolutely the case. Okay, I'm not a VC. I'm not trying to hire you to join a VC. But if I were your friends, try to convince you to VC, the angle I think was more the following: you have the two key things that's really difficult to have for a VC to build that organically, and because you can do that because you're a journalist. Number one, you have trusted people in the industry that you can go for advice and check information. That's actually not that easy, because the moment you're a VC, money start to taint relationship, right? So people are like, hey, am I telling you this because I want to pump my bags, like mark up my position, or is it something truthfully I believe this is the case? And you've spent the last 20 years talking to people, so you're a good judge of, is this correct, or if is this just fake information to try to pump up the investment? So that's actually this something is very hard to understand. The second thing is you have this network of people generally that want to talk to you when they have something exciting, and they will come to you for validation to some degree. So your access to a pipeline of investment is much better than an average VC. Because fundamentally, it's about access and have a good network to go verify information. That's pretty much what a VC needs to do. Well, the allocation, things like that, as you said, I think do an MBA, look at it. It's not that hard. So that's why I think it's not crazy, and it's something you should take. And then going back to, if once you do VC, come back to journalists, I actually don't think that impacts you that much, because that will make your coverage of journalists better. Because I think the problem of a journalist is, as you said, right, what's at stake is your reputation. But it's not really a decision where it's backed by money to some degree. And as a journalist, if you start to say, it's not just Eric Johnson journalist, but Eric Johnson also, I managed a portfolio in the past, and I believe based on all the things I'm seeing, this is really the real deal. Your value as a journalist, I think, would also be increased because you have experience managing a portfolio.
I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said. I know that's, it would be more controversial if we had disagreed with you right now. But yeah, if I had the knowledge that I have now, when that was in front of me, I'm not sure my decision would have changed, but I think I would have been less worried about the things that I was worried about than I am now. So I agree. I also think, to your point about journalism, and this is probably more a statement about journalism than it is about VC. The thing I'm 100% sure of is, as a VC, I would have gotten a lot more internal information about companies than I ever am able to get as a journalist. So even the most plugged in journalist only sees a part of the elephant. They never see the whole elephant, right? So yeah, being able to see that and experience that for a few years coming out of that would have made me a sharper sort of, critic, appreciator of the businesses I cover. So yeah, I agree with that. But I don't know if I'd find it interesting enough. Maybe if my bank account made it interesting enough, then I would find it interesting enough.
I agree with you. I think back in the day when I was a trader, it was not the money who motivated me. It's like we're playing a game, and every day the P&L tells you had a good day or bad day. And I care more about having a good day winning rather than the amount. And that's probably why I wasn't a great trader. I should have cared much more about the amount than so for me, it's more intellectual pursuit than rather how much money.
Totally. I think logistics is a perfect example of an industry that people stay with it. And there's a bunch of reasons why people stay with it, but a big part of it is because it remains interesting every day. And it may beat you down, and it may make you very poor for a period of time, but it's like a puzzle that has to be solved every day. And it's a little bit different every day. And I think that's what keeps people in the industry when they could obviously leave it and go find more stable, better paying jobs elsewhere.
Again, I link that back to trading a little bit, because what was interesting is, if you're curious and you want to need to react quickly, and the decision you make will have an impact, trading is perfect because you have volatility and things like that. And what you said really reminds me of that, because the reason I like shipping, I think it's the exact same thing, right? It's every year you have the new shock, Evergiven, Red Sea, Tariffs. And so then you're okay, I need to go read books because I don't know what that means.
Sure.
There's a lot of new things you need to study and learn in order to do your job correctly. But also it makes it super, super exciting, interesting, because every day is different.
For 10 years, I covered the trade compliance space, and there's not a week that's gone by this year that I haven't had to look up some term to remind myself, like, what's the difference between a tariff and a duty? What's first sale? what's drawback, all those terms, right? Like you
Yeah.
still have to go back and like do your continuing education on it, right? So yeah, for sure.
And even last week, the news about NVIDIA or AMD paying a tax to the export. And I was like, wait, can you charge a tax to do this? That doesn't sound legal.
Yeah, I will editorialize for a second. That is, in a year of crazy, that is really crazy. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's put that aside right now for a moment.
Yes.
And let's talk about logistic technology. As we established, right, you're being in this space for many, many years. Before we talk about the newest crop of technology and then the tech with AI, let's situate a bit more the history of it, right? What do you think is the first wave of technology applied to logistics in your mind?
So let me just sort of like parallel my career again. Not that I have anything to do with the evolution of logistics technology market, but so I was at that newspaper covering the ports of LA and Long Beach from 03 to 05. 05, I get hired by a trade publication called American Shipper, which was usually a competitor to the Journal of Commerce where I'm at now, because we had no one else on staff at American Shipper who was covering technology regularly. We were sort of all piecemeal covering it. We started to notice the rise of these companies that were quote unquote cloud-based, SaaS companies. These were new multi-tenant software. These were new terms to the logistics industry 20 years ago. And so the companies were primarily GT Nexus, Cargo Smart, and Intra. So that was in the 2000s. I sort of think of there being 3 eras of quote unquote logistics software. The 90s were the ERP era. That's when every company started to like base their business around a central kind of backbone system for managing accounting and bill of materials and all the things that ERPs do. That essentially was like the foundation for logistics tech, because you saw then in the .com boom, you saw a bunch of companies emerge and start to create things like transportation management systems and warehouse management systems that were essentially extensions of the ERP that were very focused on transportation and contract logistics and distribution. Post the .com boom, you start to see people become more okay with going away from on-prem, buying software by the month instead of a $2 million licensing fee up front and a 2-year implementation time. So that's sort of the cloud era, I would say, of software. And then that is also the period where you start to see people say, I can't just be shipping stuff into a complete void of information and hope it comes out the other end. So the whole visibility provider notion starts to come up in the 2000s. And then that leads just as names like GT Nexus were becoming not like the new kid on the block, but pretty much the standard for the industry, even if they were sort of on the more expensive end at that time. And people were starting to get really comfortable and actually preferring cloud, preferring SaaS, preferring multi-tenant. Then VCs start getting interested around 2011, 2012. And so the whole 2010s is the VC era of logistics tech, because you have all the names that I won't even necessarily go in. Like everybody knows the top 5-10 companies that have been VC backed. But obviously there's 2,000 or more behind them that sort of took that same path at a different scale. And then I think the decade we're in right now is the pandemic/pandemic hangover decade, where the industry kind of is figuring out where it goes. To me, and it might be the bias of my career paralleling the rise of cloud, the VC era only was able to happen because the industry accepted cloud probably 5 years after some other industries did. But obviously doing things on the internet opens up a million different possibilities that were not possible if you have servers in your own office and you've paid $3 million for a system and you hope that it doesn't cost that much to update it 5 years later. Historically, that's the way my framework for how like the categories of software that I cover have evolved.
So if I recap, there's a first stage, which is mission critical software that's deployed on-prem at the retailer. Then there's a transition to cloud. some kind of middleware, try to do the SaaS model. And then COVID basically just like, okay, let's pump much more money. One thing that always amazes me was I think each stage impacts the next stage, like how much more complicated it is. Even the first stage of TMS is fragmented. Why fundamentally in this industry, you have so many tools and so many software, and therefore it creates problem because it's harder to invest. You want winner take all or winner take most. You don't have this dynamic.
That's a multi-billion-dollar question as it relates to software in our industry. So to take TMS as an example, I remember when I was at American Shipper, we did a benchmark study on TMS every year for shippers. It was very geared around what shippers thought of it. And I usually did a report in the magazine about kind of like the state of TMS. And I remember one year going, like, it's impossible to capture this industry in a single report or a story because let's just take the US alone. You have TMSs that are aimed at shippers, TMSs that are aimed at freight brokers, TMSs that are aimed at truckload carriers, TMS is aimed at drayage or port carriers, TMS is aimed at freight forwarders. Then if you take shippers, you have standalone software that the shipper uses themselves. You have ERPs that provide a connected TMS that theoretically the data flows. You have managed transportation providers that provide you the TMS software and run it for you. Basically, they're an arm of your transportation team. You have a 3PL that can offer you a standalone TMS. You have consultants that partner with three TMSs that will offer you a TMS and maybe run it for you. There's like 80 different permutations of all these things. And then the other big divide is you have domestic TMSs that were being shoehorned into international use cases, and you had international TMSs that were trying to develop domestic TMSs, but there was no market for it because there were already 2,000 domestic TMSs. So they were never going to make money on that. It was only just to provide value to their international customers to give them like a homogenous experience. So that's just one example of the fragmentation. So you asked, why does the fragmentation exist? You might recall I used to do a Substack back in the day, which people ask me about all the time, and it's just been a victim of time and bandwidth. And I feel like if I can't do it to the level I want to do it, I'm not going to do it. So, but
True artist.
yeah, I'm a real diva. That's true. That's very true. I don't deny. One of my favorite ones that I did, because I think it holds true to this day and it will probably hold true forever, is I think the industry actually has an inclination toward fragmentation. So by that, I mean, if you look at the way a shipper thinks about its business, it could easily, a big multinational company, their logistics team could easily say, I want to make my life easier. I'm just going to use one global 3PL for everything. I'm not going to deal with ocean carriers. I'm not going to deal with local agents. I want one relationship and manage everything. And that would be the easiest path. But they don't do that. They have a lead logistics provider. They have secondary and tertiary and maybe 5 different logistics providers. And then they have specialist ones in different lanes. And they may have a direct relationship with the carrier. And they may supplement that with a 3PL relationship. And by the way, when they have a direct relationship with a carrier, they want to use 3 carriers or 5 carriers. They don't want to just use one. And when they go into US gateways or European gateways, they might have a preferred gateway, but they also have a backup gateway. And with software, have you ever met a single large shipper with one software system? No, they have 5 software systems. And they may think that it's because they're saddled with it, but I think it's because they have this huge fear of single points of failure. And they have this huge fear of being over-reliant on a company that's outside their 4 walls, and they don't want to be too reliant on any single company that they don't directly control. That's my psychological explanation for why there's so much fragmentation in the market. There's a whole bunch of other reasons, right? Like, it is difficult to serve exporters in Chile the same way it is to serve importers in France and exporters in China. And there are absolutely business cultural differences. This industry loves face-to-face as much as possible. And if you can't visit your customers because they're literally on another continent and it's too costly to do that, that matters too. Other than those like 2 factors, I can't figure out why no one has been able to take like dominant shares in most of the markets. So that's my explanation.
No, I think that's probably right. In the previous episode, we talked to Adrian Pina, right, at OCL. I was always confused by, okay, so you're a sales guy at the carriers. Who are you selling to? Who's the guy making decisions? How they make decisions? And what I learned in the conversation with him is he doesn't even know how it's made decision made at the BCO, because there's a guy procurement, he talks to him, right? So when he brings someone to dinner, but within the organization of the BCO, there's another guy who does the allocation to different carriers. And so what's the KPIs? Like, I don't know. How do they judge if the guy's doing a good job or not? I don't know. Okay, so then how's the CFO makes a judgment? Are we making the right allocation? How do we assess the performance? And I think what you say is correct, because everybody is so fearful of the disruption. The only way is to put a lot of redundancy. But they believe that today the cost is worth the risk that they're covering. But the reality is nobody actually has looked at it deeply. Is the cost you're spending having this fragmentation?
People bring in consultants and pay them a huge amount of money to do that sort of work, right? It's really hard. It's not easy to make that calculation about whether, reducing some redundancy actually is going to translate. Cause it's like buying insurance a little bit, right? Like you only know when something has gone wrong that hurts the thing that you would build redundancy around. So you can never test it truly until that happens, which you don't want it to ever happen.
And it's completely path dependent, right? I think it goes back to the argument I have with people about, is Gemini a good idea not having this hub and spoke model?
Yep.
To me, it's fully dependent on the path. There are paths for which Gemini is a great idea because the volatility is not there and you get guarantee and then it's more reliable, it's great. But there are paths where if one of the hub gets shut down for whatever reason, then you are really, really shit out of luck because it's really hard to bounce back. And it's impossible to predict. It's akin when in trading is a tail risk. Right now, it looks like it's a good idea based on the result.
Tell. I mean, we're way too early.
It's a path-dependent thing, right? It's dependent on crisis situation.
I mean, I will on the Gemini thing, not that we want to go down that rabbit hole necessarily, but that for 20 years, we've been talking about differentiation of service in the market, right? So from that perspective, for the independent players, I would never judge in this immediately whether something is working or not. But I would say for the market as a whole, I think it's a good thing that there are different service ideas and options, right, for the market. So I would say, back to the redundancy thing, right? Don't you remember coming out of the pandemic, a lot of the discussion was about how the entire supply chain industry was going to change from just in time to just in case.
Yeah.
And again, back to my Substack, I wrote about how that was a bullshit dilemma because every single supply chain person had to balance just in time and just in case every single day of their life, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic. There wasn't a choice. You always had to make, maybe it swung a little bit more this way or a little bit more this way, but the idea, it's we're going to have no redundancy. Everything is going to be literally just in time. And then we're going to go the exact opposite. And we're going to have over redundancy and we're going to absorb all this cost just so we never miss a sale. The plant is never closed for 1 minute is nonsense. The industry has always built in backup plans because everybody's been burned for something or other over their career. So anyway, that's I'll get off my soapbox.
I think these days also, people think that the retailer, the Walmart, those guys, they have a super good model, the data scientists predicting everything. When you know this, it's all bullshit. There's a lot of things you don't really have clarity. Right? Every day you have to make decisions based on some gut feel, pattern matching, and some risk you're willing to take. And that's why fundamentally when I asked the question to Adrian, was hey, so how does one of the large BCO, how does CFO measure the performance of the supply chain? And his guess was is it cheaper or more expensive than last year? Which is that's bullshit measurement. I would say the heuristic of someone who doesn't have technical background is probably very close to the truth. At the end of the day, it's probably just imagine there's a boss, he's looking at the numbers. Okay, last year we spent this year we spent this. Okay, good job.
The person with the technical background just figures out a fancier way to measure that same thing. Right?
Exactly. Anyway, actually, before we move on to the AI component, there's another thing I want to touch upon is why do you think those investments so far has not returned that much significant ROI for the investors, at least? So,
this is something I've thought about a lot over the last few years. So I'll say three things and then I'll come back to them so I don't forget the third one by the time I'm done explaining the second one. Fragmentation is definitely part of it. Long sales cycles is definitely part of it. And the third one would be that a lack of appreciation early on by both founders and early stage investors about whether the industry would react to investment in specific companies. So I'll explain that a bit. So the fragmentation thing we just discussed, I think there was a sense that that was a problem to be solved rather than a feature of the industry, right? And we just discussed why it seems to be a feature of the industry that's hard to solve. And like it's not there to be solved if it's a feature, right? So I mean, it might be a strength. We don't know. It's very possible that from the industry's perspective, not the software vendor's perspective, that the fragmentation is a strength rather than a weakness. So that's one. It's really hard to scale in an industry that doesn't want to consolidate. I know this is the rock you're pushing up the hill every day. The same thing applies to standards. Even if it's a neutral, not-for-profit thing, pushing standards, you run into that exact same dynamic, right? So I think the biggest issue has been the lack of appreciation for how long sales cycles are at big enterprises to buy software for logistics and transportation. There's always this sort of hopeful view of the world that things will get faster and, you know, the whole paradigm shift. But it takes a really long time to convince enterprises to buy something, much less swap something out, much less use an entirely new category of software. Whatever you're trying to achieve, it can take 2 years. It can take sometimes longer. And it makes sense because depending on what type of company you're selling to, that department might only have budget once every 5 years to make a big bet on something. And if you're trying to sell them something small, they may have already tried 10 things, or their IT department may be like, no, this is a vector that we don't want to introduce into our ecosystem, or this is another thing to manage for us. We don't have time to integrate this for 6 months, or, you know, there's a million excuses, right? Yeah. But that long sales cycle persists today. It shortened obviously during the pandemic. It's back to sort of where it was pre-pandemic, I think. Yeah. I think buyers are more educated now. I think the software companies are more understanding of how to get things across the line faster, but it hasn't changed the underlying factors of what made long sales cycles. And then the third thing is, it's very clear to me that the initial investors into this space, all the way up to like 2018, 2019, had no appreciation for how much fight 3PLs and existing software companies and bootstrapped small providers had. They thought that this industry was like on its dying legs, waiting for some tidal wave of cool tech to overtake them. And then they'd be like, okay, I'm going to do something else. And like we talked about before, most people devote their entire lives to this industry. And a lot of them are entrepreneurs. And so they're not going to just like let some company beat them just because they got a bunch of money from a fund that they've never even heard of, that's never even talked to them and maybe doesn't even understand the industry. So that was early. So you saw those big names get a ton of money. And then there was the rebound, which is if there's a big digital 3PL that gets backed, there's 100 software companies that emerge to enable the existing 3PLs to compete with that 3PL. And so that initial company that got invested in didn't have free reign. We didn't see that in taxis, right? We didn't see like 100 companies enabling local taxi companies to be better. They just let Uber completely overrun them. Yeah. And so, I mean, I would never make the direct comparison because obviously there's a million differences. But I think from that perspective, a lot of early VCs saw this as like a market that was waiting to be wiped out as opposed to one that had more fight than they ever realized.
And I think it's also the effectiveness of marketing of startups during that phase. Yep. And GSBN started in 2021. So I met the folks after that era. But I talked to a CIO or people in digital in freight forwarders. And someone that reacted was like,
why is this
what
guy
the hell?
TV?
People are thinking in 2016 we're sending fax. We're just using like a pigeon to send messages. Like the marketing, I think, was really effective.
Oh, yeah,
you have also
sure.
pools of money coming in. Bank was the biggest culprit, but they're not the only one. There are a bunch of other VC who basically just like have tons of money. And then the narrative was very, very attractive, right? Which is a global trade, such a big business. We have one guy that's going to conquer everything, fully digitized.
They love that story. They love that's
the story. And it sounds really good. And
yeah.
I think the other thing that's also interesting is that really rubbed the people in the industry who knows what they're doing the wrong way. I talk to
Totally.
so many people who react really negatively. So I feel what happened is you have those startup and digitize who were able to hire a lot of people from Harvard, MIT, the best school, right? But when they go there, I realize actually, most of the thing we're doing is dealing with cleaning data manually and then doing custom brokerage, right? And when these two things collide, you realize actually it's actually more complicated than some other industry where you want to apply that.
And I think that most of the founders have said something to that effect, that this was a harder task than they thought it was. On the marketing thing, I think you're totally right. One of the difficulties for me in covering the space is, and I think one of the things that VC-backed companies have taken advantage of. Again, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying this is how they get notoriety, right? And why established companies struggle. So let's just take a big established global 3PL. If one of those 3PLs came out with like a press release or went on some sort of marketing tour or approached Bloomberg or CNN or TV station and said, we have a digital way to track your cargo from point A to point B, and the interface is going to be amazing. People would react like, well, of course, why didn't you have to tell me that you have this capability? You're a $12 billion company on every country on the planet. Like, why would that even be news? Whereas if a VC-backed startup says we are revolutionizing the customer experience, it's news because the part of their business or that feature represents a huge part of their business. So it actually is a big difference in their own business. And that's just an asymmetry that you can never get past. And frankly, the companies that were saying that, using that as a lever to get more attention, that runs out. And now they can't use that same thing to move me in 2025 that they did in 2018. So, and they know that. Well,
they have AI now.
Your point about the backlash too, right? I think there's a case to be made that some of the marketing, I feel like we're talking about a specific company, but I think this applies beyond.
No. I think it's in general.
Single company. I think it's in general. I think there's a case to be made that some of the marketing obscures the actual advances and progression that these companies brought to the industry. Because if you rub enough people the wrong way, they're going to ignore the good things you do, or they're going to say the good things you do are not good. And so, but it's not my place to say whether they went too far, they didn't go far enough. That's their decision. So,
don't get me wrong. I didn't mean that as a dig that they shouldn't have done this, because I actually think it's a function that you really need that to attract outsiders who are not from the industry to say, hey, maybe that's something we want to. So I actually think all in balance, I think net is a positive for the industry because it was able to shine the light to the industry and bring a lot of outsiders. Say, hey, maybe there's something to do. Now the value, we haven't captured that immediately, right? Because it's difficult, it's challenging. But to me, I think it's fair play to play that game marketing. Because, you're a startup, you need to raise money to survive, right? Otherwise, you're dead. So you have to do whatever you have to do, right? Which I think is fair. I think where it's a bit complicated is where you start to rub the existing industry player the wrong way because they feel like, what's going on? You're making us look really dumb. Well, like the reason things are this way is there's a history behind it, right? You cannot just brush that aside and just pretend because you're using cloud, all the things be solved. And I think that's the tension.
Now, I think more broadly than like marketing and lack of traction, I think the value of these companies and what time frame investors can expect to see a return, or whether they can ever expect to see a return, is still extremely TBD, right? At this point, because so many factors are out of their hands. There's the things we talked about, fragmentation. The market has returned to sort of like a lack of like desperation, like they were 3 years ago, and now it's more measured. The costs of things are more attached to like actual ROI. In the meantime, the amount of money you need on an ARR basis to go public is higher. And VC-backed companies are staying private longer, right? Yeah. So all of these factors lead to, we don't yet know if any of these valuations are, I think the closest proxy is like, what are things going for on secondary markets? That's not public information for most people. Every once in a while, you'll see someone post a screenshot of what they're being offered secondaries. But that's the only insight we get into like where these companies are actually valued at this point.
I think the other thing that you didn't touch on, but I think maybe it's included in the long sales cycles. The decision to buy those new software is not as important compared to the other choices, right? Yes, you sell me something, it's going to be better, but I don't see immediately the value. And the only time I can see the value is all my system has to commit in digital way and all my partner has to use this thing. So for me to see the value, everyone has to use the same system. And I think that's ultimately the reason the sales cycle is so long, right?
Yeah, it's big tension. I honestly think as well, investors are taking a more patient view of some of these things than they might ordinarily have done. I think the TAM was always overestimated. I joked about this. Anyone with a T number in your TAM, like as a VC, I would have been like, okay, nice to talk to you. Like you have an irrational view of this market. If you look at it from a MNC, like manufacturer, retailer, or CPG type company, you think about all the different categories of software a company like that needs to invest in, upgrade. Logistics is one of 20, 30, 50, depending on how sophisticated your business is. And oftentimes it's not ever the most important. Like you could go 20 years and a transportation system is never the most important thing. So agreed. That's another sort of dynamic that's hard to overcome.
Okay, so the more we talk, sounds like we really doomer on technology for logistics, that this market shouldn't exist. That's not my belief, by the way.
Yeah,
right now,
yep.
Let's invoke one of the most important miracle right now, which is AI. I recall maybe 2 years ago when first ChatGPT came out, I think that was where you run the TPM tech. I remember where I was joking with you and Manish from Matchlog, because every 2 slides we were talking about ChatGPT for this, ChatGPT for this. How do you feel today about this new wave of AI-enabled startups?
Yeah, actually, I guess I need to revise my answer. This decade is probably that decade of pandemic/AI. So it's going to have to share that name. It's really difficult for me to sort of wrap my head around how I can be of use to my readers. That's if I'm being totally honest. Because every time something new happens, and in 2018 it was blockchain, which I know you feel probably as strongly as anyone I know that there's an application for it in our industry. And then 3 years prior to that, it was getting my head around like what VC was and how that worked and how that was influencing. To me, it's been a really steep learning curve the last few years, understanding what AI is, what it isn't, why it's meaningful, why someone in a non-technical role needs to care about it, why software companies care about it in a different way than their customers do. We could do 2 hours just on that, right? In terms of the crop, so I think there's like just very simply, there are AI/automation specialists that are really targeting workflows in our industry and aren't really focused on changing specific process as much as they are just trying to infuse sort of like decision-making software, or how should I put this, data migration software, I guess is probably the way I would describe it to myself, across all of the different touch points in the industry, right? So that's one category, which I think are sort of AI specialists, but they aren't a process or domain specialist. They're an AI specialist that probably feel like they could introduce this across anything, whether you want to quote faster or update a customer on a milestone or or pay an invoice accurately, right? There's a million applications. Then on the other side, you have either companies that are focused on a process and have AI as the backbone and have always had AI as the backbone. So companies that probably emerged in the last 3 years, or incumbent software companies that have sort of had to either re-architect everything so that AI is at the core, or they're building like a parallel part of their product that incorporates like a chat bot or some sort of interface that a person can query their existing software through text or voice to help them use or navigate that software. So that's 3 categories. Maybe the latter 2 are sort of part of a bigger category, but that's the way I think about it. I think right now, the way the buyers think about what they invest in and what they understand, I think the second category is probably more palatable for them right now, because most people in our industry like companies that understand what they do, have domain expertise, can speak in their language, can demonstrate that their software does something tangible. So to me, it's a little more compelling right now if you have an existing piece of software that does something and you're using AI to power that or make it better or make it easier for the user to access than it is to say, we're going to eliminate this process because all it is just a system talking to another system and you don't even need to be a part of it. And we can do that across 20 different things. That's kind of a scary prospect, honestly. So,
and I think that goes back to the thing we were discussing earlier, right? I'm quite excited about AI as a tool for this industry. Is if we believe fundamentally fragmentation will always exist, I want the tool set up my way. Frankly, it's very expensive to build those front end effectively, right? However, and I think you wrote about the vibe coding in one of your posts earlier this year. If you can use AI to spin up a version very quickly, very cheaply, that's catered to the needs of the user where they don't have to choose, then actually the adoption could potentially be much higher. And I think that maybe that also impacts the thing you were discussing earlier about the sales cycle.
I agree. Let's be super honest about this. This is not a choice. Like AI is already having and will have a bigger impact on the industry. We don't yet know what that is, but you can't be like, I'm just going to stick with what I'm doing because I think what I'm doing is going to still be here in 10 years. It's not a choice. The choice has been taken from your hands. The choice now is, do you understand it well enough to make a decision about what path you want to take? The vibe coding thing. So this is a perfect example. If your sales team is going into someone in our industry and saying, we're going to enable vibe coding to happen for even people who've never coded anything in their life. Do you think that's going to get a lot of traction with someone in our industry? Or if you say we are going to enable your team to create an application specific to their need around quoting. That's where you have to tether it to the language and the mental framework of the industries. As a teaser for TPM 26, I think this is going to be a big part of the program because getting people's head around what AI is doing now is interesting, but getting their head around what it may enable 5 years from now in terms of if someone as dumb as me from a coding perspective has the ability to prompt a program to create an app specific to my company's needs. I mean, there's definitely a path where the tools get good enough and they don't require the power of the sun for everyone to actually use them. That's how everyone essentially works in 5 years is we don't wait for the big system that everybody on our whole team is using, but we just have a bunch of little point things that we've created for our specific needs. That's definitely a potential outcome. So yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated by this stuff. I'm not convinced yet, but I'm fascinated by it. So
I think that there are a lot of holes in this argument. The biggest hole, I think, is the safety. Let's say you vibe code, you're not a programmer, and you spin something. Can you trust the information that's coming from this? But my bet is over time, the tool will get better. And you put good safeguard around the data that you use, what you access to. But you need to control the data level. But the front end fundamentally, I think, can be any form that's easy for you to use and should be adapted to you almost.
I don't know if you remember, but there was I think at that same TPM Tech where ChatGPT dominated the discussion. This longtime guy in the industry, John Motley, he came up around the same time as GT Nexus. He's been doing this for 27 years, super intelligent guy. He said the best AI is no UI.
Yes.
And he it was a catchphrase obviously, but it actually is sort of coming to pass now where you're probably going to have a screen. In fact, I just had lunch yesterday with a software vendor, so I'm stealing this from him. Our next iteration of our system is we have the system that they've bought, a SaaS piece of software, and the right side is just a chat interface that helps you query this stuff instead of you having to go into it, right? And over time, that chat query probably takes more and more of the screen, and you need to see less of the system because you trust that it's pulling the right information. You trust that it's telling you the truth. Your partners are also aligned with this. So you trust the information coming from them.
I think, as you say, it's a UI thing. When DeepSeek was first launched, and then the biggest thing wasn't the model was great. It's more the expose a chain of thoughts. You can see how the AI was reasoning. And that sounds like actually not that interesting. But counterintuitively, because you show that, I know how the AI think about it. Anthropomorphizing the AI, that gives me more confidence, even though actually you don't have any extra information, but just see the thought pattern. And as you said, right, it's maybe eventually you don't need this one anymore.
So to take this to a deeper level, like away from the user and on the development side, it goes way beyond vibe coding, right? Like the thing, these companies now are using tools, and maybe these tools are available because they're being offered at a loss. And at some point you actually have to pay. There's a cost for all of these queries that you're doing on these, but in the meantime, they're being used. And like a perfect example of like how sophisticated this can be is, say a programmer joins a new software company and they're asked to like sort of update some code. You can use a tool to explain the thought process behind why the code that exists right now it was built the way it was, because it may seem like completely ridiculous to the new programmer who may delete it or just like write some crazy code, whatever their approach to it is. But if they have an understanding of why it was built that way,
yes,
that gives them a whole level of depth about like maybe how the industry functions, or maybe why that company is successful at something, right? So that's, I think that reasoning behind why the code is being generated is actually hugely important, whether it's a user or the developer.
That's very true. I'll give you another example, completely unrelated to what we're just talking about. So I'm in many WhatsApp chat. There's one which is super geeky, is about basically science and reading papers. And someone shared a plugin that you can have for reading archive paper, which is the open repository of paper on AI. So what's super interesting is a couple of years ago, I used to be super interested in that. It's like during the age of deep learning. So I was reading all those papers, but it was challenging because engineering school was 20 years ago. I don't fully recall everything. I have to focus. But now they have an AI chatbot who explain the paper to you. And you can say, I don't understand this one. Can you associate to some other paper? Just put that in the context. That's actually fascinating because essentially those tools help us also learn. And that's probably another function that will make it valuable and interesting long term, because it's actually, that goes back to another question I have for you is job losses. If you have those AI job losses, but is there another scenario where potentially having those tools will also help people maintain their job or upscale them? What are your thoughts on that aspect?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I sort of, my head goes in different directions depending on like the month and who I've talked to recently on this. The cynical part of me feels like we're underappreciating how much these tools can do and how ruthless the corporate world can be in like focusing on efficiency and profit margin and not really like caring or not feeling it's their responsibility to retrain people to do new things if they don't need those people to do new things, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no government mandate that says if you introduce AI that replaces the work of 3 people, that you have to find work for those 3 people. So I think in a certain sense, this is not just logistics. This is like across the board, sort of underappreciating how fast technology creates new employment, creates new abundance. Is a loaded word now in some ways, but like it creates new opportunities that we didn't really foresee before it existed. The only difference right now is we move so much faster. It's not the industrial revolution of the late 80s, right? Where society had 30 years to figure out how this worked. We have like 3 years, maybe, to figure out how to stem some of these job replacements. And we as a society, I'm going to get on my soapbox again. We as a society have not been particularly great the last few years at dealing with the social aspects of setbacks, right? And so I worry about that. Relevant to the logistics industry, the short term is we still appreciate people and we appreciate relationships. So I think you could potentially see some like customer service attrition in sales heavy organizations. So 3PLs where you don't own the freight, you don't necessarily own the assets. Your big cost is people and tech. If the tech does the work of the people, I don't see how you justify having the same number of people to do that work, right? One thing I haven't heard anyone sort of discuss about this is, and I don't know how this works in practice, because this goes back to what you were just talking about in terms of like having an AI assistant help you understand the context for something. Like the global logistics industry has been based on, some people call it tribal knowledge. I hate that phrase, honestly. But the theory that like you learn from the person who you're around. Let's fast forward 10 years from now. If the person who is doing data entry and it's supposedly like a low value add, uninteresting job, repetitive, but if that person is not doing that and knowing, oh, this field always is tricky, or this customer always sends this note on a Tuesday, but if you talk to them in this way, it's not an issue, right? Like just these little things that human relationships create, these little pieces of knowledge. So that's the first level. Like, how does the industry sort of evolve into that when that is lost? And then the second thing is just repetitively doing something over and over helps you understand the industry better. And if a lot of those repetitive tasks are now undertaken by a system, do I actually know the industry as well as I used to? If I'm in a role managing these bots, I mean, these are all open questions, right? Like we don't know how this evolves. Like for instance, in high school, I was good at math, but we had graphing calculators, right? We didn't have to like get the compass out and the protractor and all that stuff. As a result, I have zero muscle memory about how to do any of this stuff because I have a calculator doing it for me. What muscle memory is lost that can never be regained again if we hand this off, right? It may be great. There's probably no reason for me to manually do math anymore if a computer can do it faster and more accurately than me. But that's a very specific unidimensional thing. The job that most of these people do is very like multi-dimensional. It's a very chaotic environment. And if they lose the ability to understand some of the building blocks around that, does that affect their decision-making when they have to make a decision for which a system has been doing all that like legwork for them? I don't know. I honestly have no idea.
I resonate a lot with what you're saying. In my career as a trader, we have this kind of training. It's not master apprentice, but it's a bit like that, right? When you start, you don't have as much experience, you run a smaller book. And the key thing that's, especially in derivatives trading, is you need to build your intuition. Depending on the change of price and rate or whatever parameter that affects the value of the book, the P&L will change. You have to make decisions. So one of the skills that you have to build is, if the market is, let's say, down 1%, the rate is doing that, what is intuitively the value of the book? Should it be up 100,000, down 100,000? You need to have that sense because you completely rely on those tools. Sometimes the tools go wrong. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, which is for the shipping industry system, you need to do some not very interesting job for a couple of years to build the muscle memory to the low level understanding. And that's not just for shipping. It's like for trading, for lawyers, for what else? Investment bankers, right? But doing that, you're learning the craft. Yes, for a couple of years, those guys who use AI to help them, they're going to do fine. But who are they going to pass their job to the next generation? That's a very, very complicated question.
Will the AI agent just train its next AI agent?
I somehow I don't believe in that. I don't believe in scenario.
Rather than 3 years. So that's, I mean, that would be the technologist's answer, right? So
that's very realistic to me. And I think the other reason also, I feel would be need some human interface. You get the debate or the conversation I have with Adrian. My feeling is we tend to try to boil down the industry as, let's say, between the carrier and then a shipper to capacity and rates. Those are the only two parameters. We negotiate on these two things. Those are the two dimensions at which you can negotiate. But at the end of the day, shit happens. And it's the human relationship that will make sure that you still have a thing that works. So it's a give and take. And how do you program that in the tool? What's the appreciation for this person? I've been doing business for the last 10 years. Maybe I do this. I'll get some other benefit. How do you program it? It cannot, right? And I think the business don't want that either. I just don't see that happening.
There are definitely entities, if not whole categories of businesses in our industry that need things to be slightly opaque, for sure. And if everything is run by systems, they will make cold, unemotional decisions with nice emotional language in the email that's generated to make you feel like you're important, but like the decision behind that is made without any sort of emotion, right? And so I don't have an answer, honestly. Like my least favorite thing in like November, December is when I get asked, hey, what are your top 5 tech trends for next year? What do you think is going to happen? And it's like, honestly, I don't know. Like I could have never predicted anything that's happened in the last 10 years. I report, I don't predict. I think this is a cliche, but it's the companies that are like playing around with this stuff right now are going to separate themselves from the companies sort of just happy with where they are right now. And even if you kind of make some missteps, even if you decide something's not for you, you have to be really highly aware of what's going on. Because from like an efficiency perspective in the next couple years, you could turn around and find that you're 30% less efficient on a per employee basis than your competitor. And that's just no matter what the tariffs are, no matter what shipping rates are, like you can't overcome that, right? So but it's going to be fascinating to watch for sure.
Since you just brought up tariff, this year I think special because you have AI, you have this narrative, the AI, and then you have this sledgehammer, which is a tariff, shaking everything up. Let's imagine I make you a VC now. My Series then give me $1 billion and you have to spread it out among a couple of segments. Which segment is most interesting combination of this forcing function of tariff and change of supply chain and using AI?
Well, as you were saying, tariff and AI are the two, there's the sledgehammer. I was like, you can't spell tariff without AI. So
that's a great line. That's a great
I literally just thought of it while you were saying that. Okay. 12 years ago, I remember it was 2013. I was at the user conference of a company called Amber Road, which was acquired by E2Open, which was literally just acquired by WiseTech Global. I don't know what part of it still remains relevant to what WiseTech plans to do with it. And at that point, their customers were primarily shippers that were using it to manage both international transportation and trade compliance. So their theory, Amber Road's theory, was if you manage those in tandem, starting from like the trade documents before it even is loaded in a container, you have a much more seamless process because you're not managing two separate processes in parallel. You're managing as a single stream, essentially. At that conference, there was a session about how AI was going to transform product classification. Everyone said, wow, amazing. No, this will never happen. Humans know better what a product should be classified than a machine will ever will. So fast forward 12 years, I'm in India right now, but right before I left for India, I was at a conference in DC, the AEI conference, which is for trade compliance professionals at importers and exporters. And every single conversation was about how the pace of trade reg changes, even independent of what the US is doing, and the complexity of things like what if scenario planning, like if the tariff from this country goes to this and the tariff from this country goes to this, would it make sense to switch to them? Like, is that going to flag, if I make that switch, is that going to flag a targeting issue? Or is that going to create a red flag for the targeting system that the regulatory agencies use? The discussion now is very much in that sector. Like, it has progressed way beyond human beings creating a customs entry by hand, sending it into the system that like US CBP started developing in the 70s. And then a human being at CBP scrutinizes that entry and decides whether it could be an issue or not. So for me, this has been a chronically underinvested industry, I would say. Partially because trade compliance has always been a reactive space. Most companies only invest in it after they get audited or after they get hit with a penalty. They don't try to avoid the penalties in the first place. Some do. Some know they're in a very highly scrutinized industry. Like if you're in what's known as dual use products, which is a product that can be used by the military or consumers, you know very well the penalties if you get it wrong. So like those companies use it. But if you make toothpaste, because you need health clearances, right? There's very few industries that couldn't benefit from having a proactive stance on this, but it hasn't always been the case. So I think there's probably going to be a gold rush in that space. That's a good area to invest in. Again, it's fragmented, like it's fragmented and it always will be. And I mean, the other area I think that's interesting to invest in is to the point that we were talking about before is knowledge transfer. So if you take the point of view that the more a system does, the less a person knows, the ability to have like a database of like corporate knowledge that's accessible around logistics is very important. So if a person is out there's continuity. I've seen people dance around the edges on that stuff, but to me, that's going to be of growing importance. So, I mean, those would be the big things. Specific processes, I wouldn't invest in any of them because there's already 50 companies doing that. I would invest at the very early stage and hope that it had a good outcome that made sense for me. But you have to have some inside knowledge or some like visionary view of where the market is to have the conviction to like invest at a C and D level at this point, because I don't know how you make a return on that at this point. So this is why I wouldn't be a good VC. I would just say no to everything. So.
No. You give a very good, you give a very clear recommendation, which is GTM. And that's actually the sector. I agree with you. My mental model for it is, who are the people who does the most boring job, who makes tons of money in US, because the complexity of regulation is tax lawyer.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So here, what we just happen is the complexity is going to go up the wazoo with all the permutation that can happen. And do you rather do GTM very fancifully, just let the ship falls where it lands, or do you want to have a strategy? And I think, as you said, because it was underinvested before, there's a lot of opportunity. And the tariff rates right now are just changing. And sometimes you don't understand what tariff rate is, as you wrote in the past, right? Sometimes like, why is this tariff higher for this country than this country? Sounds like the rational decision made are completely out of whack to what's stated. Therefore, you cannot predict. Therefore, you can only simulate and look at potential. And if that happens, how do I react to the scenario? I agree with you. I think that call, I'm willing to bet I think you're correct.
I'll give people a free business idea, because I think this is going to be an increasingly important thing. I have no idea. It could be completely gone by the time someone spins something up, but the ability to understand like country of origin determination on a material where it's like a composite or aggregate material, and you literally have no idea where some of the materials came into. If anyone can figure that out using tech, that's a huge opportunity. Because right now I know every company is trying to figure out, like, if you're in metals or aluminum and you're trying to figure out where the initial components and what percentage of them came from a country that has low tariffs versus high tariffs, that's a huge complexity for shippers in those commodities right now. So
yeah, I agree. Let's move on to the last part. So
Okay.
you host a show, Let's Talk About Supply Chain. I think that's your professional show. But also you host a personal show that launched earlier this year called Counter Press. So why did you do that? What motivates you to do this new show?
The new show, so I've been doing the Let's Talk Supply Chain show for 4 years now, if my math is correct. I started it during COVID because I had time and I was asked to do it, and that's been great. It's fun. It's a little bit like a short version of this. You were on it earlier this year. So it's very relevant to what I do. I get to go a little bit deeper in with people. The Counter Press is purely an idea that I've been kicking around forever. I'm like obsessed with soccer, football, and follow it far too much. All the time I should be reading nonfiction books. I'm probably reading about transfers and, expected goals versus actual goals. It's actually interesting that the analytics have gone crazy in soccer right now, like literally over the top crazy. Like they wear these like devices that track not just their like health and heart rate, but their movements and there's all these patterns that are followed about like which player excels in a particular like quadrant of the field. And that it's like Moneyball times 1,000, because it's way more multi-dimensional than baseball is. One guy throws a ball to another guy, there may be some wind or something, but this is like 22 people constantly moving, and it's crazy. But anyway, I'm not a huge fan of that stuff, honestly, but
you're getting me interested to soccer now.
I know, that's how I figured that might be the end for you. I'm more of a like get off my lawn romantic. I preferred it when they were like out of shape guys who used to show up to games hungover, but they were geniuses. Anyway, so over the course of my career, interacting with people, especially internationally, but even in the US, I would always find out, oh, they follow this team or they love the sport. And in my mind, I was like, I need to do a show with logistics professionals about soccer or football. No discussion about logistics, just about football, but with people in our industry. Yeah. So that's how it started, and it's been super fun. I haven't been able to record as many episodes as I would like, but I plan to do a lot more in the months ahead, and And it's very much like a passion project. I'm not expecting any financial return. It's like in my head, I'm like, oh, I quit my day job and I just do this
No, I don't
all
think
week.
so.
Someone's sponsoring it for $1 million and I'm all good. But the offers haven't rolled in yet. So
I think
I'm
the
just doing
expression
it for fun.
the expression YouTube creator is called, what you're doing is called niching down. But I'm not sure if you niche down too much, because I think
I niched down too much.
Oh,
the Venn diagram of logistics provider soccer, it's a very small. It's very small.
I think it's bigger. It's probably bigger than people realize, but it's still very, very small.
Exactly.
So let's put it this way: it's probably too small to monetize.
Okay. So now we've established your credential as a podcast host. Also, you've started a podcast. So what do you think about Schelling Point? Do you have any advice for us how we can improve? What are the clear mistakes we're making?
I don't want to be boring, but this has been really fun. And I think you have the exact right approach. We've done almost 2 hours and it's flown by. Obviously, I've not gotten bored or not short of opinions on things. I think the challenge is, because knowing you have a lot of diverse but connected interests. So the challenge for you is going to be to find guests that are interesting enough to listen to for 2 hours, but have the name recognition that would get people to listen to it in the first place. Because my experience has been some of the guests that I think have no name recognition have been my favorite guests to have on, and have been clearly more insightful than some of the people that have big names and are going to get a lot of people in because they want to hear what they have to say. And part of that is not because those big name people are less interesting. Sometimes they just have to be a little more buttoned up because of the prominence in the industry. Like it's easier for a researcher who has, nothing less at stake than to be really interesting than a CEO of a company, of a publicly traded company or something, right? So that's just the nature of how open people can be. But especially as you do this long form thing, which I think it's needed, because what I've noticed is there's a lot of long form interviews of people in our industry by people outside our industry.
Yes.
And the conversations end up sounding really interesting, but being sort of empty calorie. The interviewer has back to my thing about when I was a young business reporter and I had no context, and whatever the person was telling me, I had to believe. I see a lot of long form discussions about logistics where the interviewer is sort of gee, wow, I never knew that's how it worked. And the person is just telling them their version of it rather than the real version. So I think there's a place for this. I appreciate I'm buttering you up rather than giving you constructive criticism here.
Exactly.
But,
I was going to say, give me criticism.
But I think you coming to the industry and appreciating it and now absorbing it, but coming at it from a technology and a trading kind of background, that where your interest lies.
That's my shtick. That is my shtick.
I mean that's better. That's a better approach than someone who's almost too inside. Because if you're too inside, you're going to exclude a lot of people who want to learn about this in a deep way. It's going to be too jargony. It's going to be too inside kind of baseball stuff. So honestly, I wouldn't change much of the format other than just making sure you're getting that right mix of guests that can go as deep as you want to go. Right.
Yeah. No, I think right now, that actually reflects the challenge we have, as you said, right? So some of my favorite episodes didn't have as many views as I would have hoped for, namely the one with Mark Levinson. I thought we went really, really deep, super interesting thing. But I think right now there's only 80 views or something, right? But then the funny thing also is it's the only episode where I have people who are not directly connected to me, who went to my LinkedIn and post, great episode, I loved it. And I was involved in the shipping. It's like one or two clear validation, but the view is not there. So the view hasn't validated it was a good episode, but I had confirmation by people who are not connected to me to say, hey, great job.
Well, think of it like this. The point of this is you have fun doing it and you hope to sort of
well, technically it's a GS podcast, so it's not this is not the counter press.
No, I know, but so what I'm saying is you have fun doing this, but there's a reason for doing it, like a business reason for doing it, right? And so if you think about it from an email click-through perspective, right? Yep. Like a good promotional email might have a 3% click-through rate, but those 3% of people might convert the whole promotional campaign worthwhile, right? And so those connections, even on the lesser watched episodes, might return the entire show essentially.
No,
to put it,
that's That's a very good way to put it. It's about what's your KPI. Do you care about having the maximum view? And to be honest, to get more views, there's sometimes the dark ways where to buy the click farm from Philippe.
That's
If you want
vanity.
to get more
That's
views,
vanity
it's very easy to do.
Yeah.
But we don't care about this view. We want to actually touch the right people. And then to the degree of the diversity of guests, I agree with you. I think we're working down the path that's quite dangerous, to be honest, is we're trying to bring a lot of guests from other sector, which sometimes make the thing harder for someone who subscribes to Schelling Point. If you subscribe, expect the episode with Lynn did really well. Okay, like more than 600 views. You subscribe, it's about decarbonization. Suddenly, you're talking about technology. Wait, that's not decarbonization. I'm not interested in that. And we are also going to interview some people, some lawyer talking about legal reform. I was like, wait, I thought I was subscribing for shipping. Why do I care
So
about legal
people
reform?
won't know necessarily what the podcast is about.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so I think that is the challenge we're facing right now. Exactly. So we need to find what is the identity, how we position it, and then to go back to what you're saying is how do we build the interest for people? Let's say I build a trust with the audience, okay, this is worth sitting down for 1 hour to listen to this podcast because there's interesting tidbits. You also need to, I guess, for us to make more effort to try to tell the story, explain why you should care about this episode. What's the nuggets, the interesting thing in this episode? And definitely, I think the one I'm going to use for this episode is there's AI in Tariff. I forgot exactly what you said. We're going to find out.
You can't spell Tariff without AI.
You can spell Tariff without AI, yes. That is the clickbait title for sure. Okay, so thanks a lot. I have so much fun on this podcast with you. So we have our gimmick. Your gimmick is ask which musician do you like. Our gimmick is hopefully have a good time. If you have to recommend this podcast to another guest to come on, who would you recommend and why?
Well, so first of all, I have to correct you. I have two gimmicks on my show. I ask who's your favorite musician, and then I finish with a terrible dad joke at the end of every episode. So who would be a good guest? Well, I'm going to relate it to what we talked about in terms of the tariff and GTM. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to talk to Evan Smith at Altana.
No, I haven't.
CEO of Altana. He's one of the co-founders of Altana, which I'm sure you are aware of. Yep. And he also was on I forget if he was on the founding team or like early employee of Panjiva.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
What,
which right? self-disclosure is part of the company that I work for now.
That's true.
When Panjiva sold to S&P Global, I don't even think I was with the JOC, and the JOC was not a part of S&P Global yet. So that all happened pre S&P Global, but very interesting company. He has a very interesting view of the way that trading, not your trading, but like global trade will evolve in the future, and the role that like regulatory agencies play in that, and obviously the role that tech plays in that. So he would be a really interesting guest, I think.
If you can make a recommendation, I would love to have him. I think I love the vision that he described, the Google map for trade. That's the original vision. I thought that was actually a very nice way to put it, what they want to do. Yeah. So yeah. Would that be thanks.
Happy to make the connection.
Cool. But thanks again for joining us today on the Schelling Point. If you like the episode, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Until next time on the Schelling Point, where ideas will meet again. Thanks.